You know what? Graffiti is illegal, so I'm not gonna do it.
Japanese stuff is weird, and I'm not gonna beat around the bush. Some of it is just weird. There's even a dedicated Google result for weird Japanese things, but I'm not gonna read them because I don't think they're very accurate. Today we're diving into the deep end of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, a best-selling manga that, by sheer name alone, fits the weird Japanese category. JoJo is known for its stand abilities, manifestations of one's spirit that come with unique properties and attributes, often relating to the user in one way or another. These can range from a killer clown that attacks you in your dreams, to a rainbow snail storm that turns you into a snail through direct touch or through subliminal messaging. But despite how stupidly complicated these abilities are, their ultimate purpose is to entertain us, I think. Microsoft Bing describes bizarre as unusual and offbeat, but still endearing and interesting, and to me that's exactly what it means. But due to its ambiguous and subjective nature, the definition can be stretched thin and far, something that a good writer can take advantage of, thereby pushing the limits of what it means to be abnormal and seasoning an already delicious narrative. And this is exactly what makes JoJo such a unique series. Creator Hirohiko Araki excels at incorporating humor with intense drama, gore and violence with important life lessons, and clever puzzles with disturbing imagery to create a one-of-a-kind and truly bizarre experience for the viewer. Nice! If the word disturbing caught your eye, then boy is this the video for you. There are quite a few moments across the series that unsettled me, but none shook me to my core like Alessi, a creepy and bloodthirsty weirdo with an ability based on the Egyptian god Seth. We are first introduced to Alessi in Chapter 91 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Stardust Crusaders. This is just a little teaser coming at the end of a long multi-chapter battle between Joseph, Avdol, and Mariah. So let's see what kind of first impression this guy Alessi makes, right?
じゃあママは
お家でお洗濯している。
偉いね。一人で遊びに来てるの？
I've seen and read this part a few times, and I'm just now realizing that this kid is probably supposed to die, or at the least sustain very large injuries. In the anime, they add some extra lines, but they make sure to show the kid running away after being punched. The manga is more concerned with showing you that Alessi's favorite phrase is, good boy. Ew. More importantly though, we get our first look at Seth, and like our first look at Anubis, this is merely a tarot card of the corresponding Egyptian deity, and not an accurate representation of what Alessi actually uses. Seth is the god of storms and chaos, and while we don't get to see Alessi stand just yet, we can make some educated guesses about what it might be. Just kidding. You can't. Because while Geb, Horus, Osiris, and Thoth do a good job representing their respective deities, Anubis, Bast, and Khnum have little to do with their inspirations. There are some cute references here and there, but to my knowledge, an evil sword has nothing to do with getting into heaven, being a warrior woman has nothing to do with magnetism, and shapeshifting has nothing to do with being an alligator that shapes humans out of clay? Wait a second. Khnum shaped the first humans out of clay? I guess reconstructing your face is a clever way to turn that into a stand. And Anubis, I guess playing with the balance of life and death and showing internal suffering is a passable connection. And Mariah's magnet boobs can represent the duality of femininity that is commonly seen in ancient religion and mythology. That is, beauty and tenderness coupled with a defensive and fierce instinct, the force of attraction, and the power of repulsion. But this still doesn't explain why Adam, the literal creator of every god in Egyptian mythology, was given to a kid who likes video games. Except, younger Darby creates dolls in the image of those who have lost their souls to the Xbox. Chapter 92 begins and we get this awesome 2-page illustration of the Crusaders in some iconic poses and colors. Alessi immediately pursues them and ends up splitting Polnareff away from the group, a scene all too common by now. After some awful improvising on Alessi's part, they're engaged in combat, and holy, what the hell is that thing? Alessi fails to land a proper hit on Polnareff, who chases him through the city of Luxor, but something isn't right. By only touching Sethin's shadow, he is reverted back to the age of 7. This twist is pretty obvious in the anime since we get a POV shot of Polnareff getting shorter, with his voice changing almost immediately. And while it spoils the reveal, it kinda doesn't. By giving us an implication of what's happening to Polnareff, the anime actually does a better job building up the reveal. And the entire idea of making Polnareff a kid is just out-of-the-box thinking as a whole, playing right into the puzzling situations that make this series so fun to pick apart. Fortunately, Jotaro is nearby, but Polnareff's mind has slowly started reverting back in time. And this next part kind of loses me, because he actually does refer to Jotaro as JoJo, and he's clearly dressed in the exact same way as his adult counterpart, including the broken heart earrings that become important later in this same two-parter. And then Jotaro just lets some creep bully this kid that clearly needs help? This is just so bizarre.
Hey, that's the name of the...
And what comes next is a monologue from Alessi that is one of the first reasons why this episode is not only bizarre, but also debated to a small amount online. Though I always thought Alessi was a predator, the kind to show up on Chris Hansen's show for clarification, this was never outright confirmed. There even seem to be a few groups online who are defending the dignity of this deranged despot. Dude. It's no secret this guy is nuts, but if we're gonna accuse a character of one of the most heinous crimes, we're gonna have to dive a little deeper. The first item of concern is Alessi's catchphrase, which has been good boy for a while now. That's right, the official Shonen Jump translation of Alessi's catchphrase is something straight out of a Reddit NSFW post. Oh, and speaking of Reddit, while researching I found this amazing JoJo Theories iceberg by SM Guinea. That would be a fun series. I asked permission and he said yeah. But Alessi's official catchphrase is Erai Ne, which directly translates into an exclamation of joy followed by an invitation of agreement. So, Erai Ne! Awesome, right? I didn't get far before realizing this is not going to work, because Erai Ne can also mean a lot of other things depending on the context. I then stumbled upon an old Tumblr blog post by a user simply named Crystal, which detailed some of the darker details behind JoJo translations over the years. The blog advocates for Alessi, claiming there are a host of translation errors that paint this guy out to be much worse than he truly is. Case in point, these two images. They compare the original release, a fan translation, and the second official release that came out around the time this blog was being written. And as we can see, Alessi's original catchphrase was impressive, only becoming perverted in later releases. There's just one problem with all of this though. The blog was written in 2015 in the lead up to Alessi's first ever animated appearance. That's right, prior to 2015, Alessi wasn't animated, not even in the OVA, meaning this was the moment for Araki and everyone behind JoJo to make some last-minute character tweaks. And wow, compared to the manga, Alessi is completely changed. First and foremost, his catchphrase is now very good and attaboy in the sub and dub respectively, which is way less creepy than I'm such a good boy. But again, his other dialogue is just too weird to ignore. Let me read something and you tell me if you get uncomfortable. I can't say this too loud, but picking on the weak really gets me going. Maybe too much. I think my roommate heard me say that. The line is a little less pervy in Japanese, but how do we know there isn't some cultural connotation that slips the mind of us Westerners? Very good could be the same or even worse than attaboy or good boy when spoken at the Japanese dinner table. So if you're from Japan or know a lot about Japan, give us some insight in the comments below. But for now, although it hurts to say, I'm confident that Alessi is...
Boom. A child. No, a child.
I didn't want to believe it either, but his spoken desire to draw out the encounter instead of following Dio's orders, the way he delivers his lines, and his infatuation with children are just too concrete of facts to ignore. Even if there were translation errors, they would have had to make it into not only the original English release, but the second English release and the anime adaptation. Not to mention, whoever directed the project would have been working with Alessi's voice actor for the perfect sound. JoJo's Part 3 dub is really good. I have a hard time believing Araki would go on misrepresenting this character for almost 20 years. And even if you scrap all of that, ignore everything I just said, and consume these chapters for the first time, it is extremely clear what kind of guy Alessi is supposed to be. And somehow, Alessi is far from the most horrifying thing we're looking at today. His next move is, for the love of realism, to pull out a gun and start shooting poor 7-year-old Polnareff. And in a twist that I didn't see coming the first time around, Baby Chariot pops out to save the day. I'm not a fan of Kid Polnareff's voice in the dub, but you have to admit, Chariot is a little cute. Sethin appears once again and breaks Chariot's sword with a swing of his axe that is inscribed with the word axe, cool. And the broken piece of the sword just lands in Alessi's neck, I guess. The anime does a better job making it seem like pure luck. And as Alessi runs away, Polnareff is taken into the care of a young woman who is showing a little more than just skin. Honestly, I was gonna wait to talk about this, but there's actually some big brain writing going on here that needs addressing. This woman wants to take care of Polnareff, and he's all goo-goo over some boobies. But it kind of turns into this wholesome yet mind-bending scene where Polnareff can't quite understand his feelings anymore and reverts to a child in the care of this lady who, if we're gonna be honest, is just a complete saint. I hope nothing bad happens to her. One of the reasons I love JoJo so much is because of its unpredictability, which means that a lot of the time it doesn't really use the tropey stuff we've seen a million times. At one point I actually started writing up a complaint about this scene until I got to the part where Alessi shows up. Pay attention, young salamander, this is some peak writing right here. Alessi not only recontextualizes the entire scene of Polnareff in the bathroom, but simultaneously saves JoJo from falling prey to the same worn-out cliches. This also leads to some hilarious scenes showing Polnareff going ape mode while this beautifully illustrated monster is just on the prowl out of sight. And it isn't long before Polnareff is once again alone with Alessi, the woman nowhere to be seen. This is where episode 1 ends, with Polnareff inches from death, even though we know he won't die. And man was that weird. Let me just say, using pages from this entire bathroom sequence is a huge pain, since Polnareff's dick is literally out invisible in plenty of panels, and this woman is practically naked. It was actually a shock the first time I saw this, like, I guess in Japan it's culturally acceptable to draw little kid dongs. Let's take a break from the harsher topics to appreciate just how gorgeous Sethin is. Seriously, the line quality on the hand and on the axe is clean as hell, and the texture on the body. It's really a shame what the anime did to this guy, turning him into gray blob. Out of the 9 glory gods, this uncanny nightmare is probably the trickiest to relate to its depiction in Egyptian mythology. Set, or Seth, is the god of chaos and storms, ruling the desert, foreign lands, thunderstorms, eclipses, and earthquakes. His duty was to protect the dead as the son of Geb and Nut, gods of earth and sky respectively. But he was always jealous of his older brother Osiris for being the successful ruler of Egypt, and the guy who
had illicit relations with
his wife. Yeah, Osiris cheated on his wife Isis with Seth's wife Nephthys. Seth's wife Nephthys? Oh, and all 4 of these people are siblings, by the way. As is the case with most Egyptian gods, Seth is less of an icon and more of a character, changing roles and appearances in not only stories, but Egyptian culture as a whole. He's often seen as the villain, the dark counterpart to Osiris, and he's capable of shapeshifting. His default form is pretty ambiguous though, likely on purpose, gaining the name Seth Animal, a kind of mashup between most of the small African mammals. But Alessi's stand Sethin seems to take the form of a bird as opposed to a more common mammalian appearance. But most of the time it appears as Alessi's shadow with a creepy set of eyes, which had me asking why Araki chose this bird look, considering he already planned to give Horus, an actual bird god, to an actual bird character. I was trying to find some link between all this, and you'll be happy to hear that I found a surprisingly probable explanation. Araki is famous for traveling to the destinations he writes about, and the specific places he visited in Egypt were likely where he learned about each god, not by studying hundreds of textbooks in a classroom somewhere. This means we can approximate the path Araki took through Egypt based on the landmarks he includes in the manga, telling us that he likely traveled through the regions where Seth is most commonly worshipped, Fayum and Nut. Fayum actually gave way to the Book of Fayum, a collection of religious writings from the 4th century BC. It comes in many forms, but spans the length of about 2 papyrus scrolls and contains important information about the Egyptian religion, giving scholars information and understandings they may have never found otherwise. And most prominent of all was a guide to basically every Egyptian deity and their place of worship, and wouldn't you know it, our buddy Seth is here in the form of a flamingo. And don't forget about Nut either, the other main location where Seth was worshipped, and a key contributor to the Book of Fayum. Due to the beautiful illustrations of Kamambo in previous chapters, we can safely assume Araki spent a good chunk of time there, and wouldn't you know it, the Book of Fayum is literally inscribed on the walls of the temple. So there we go, there's our reason for the beak, but why does it look like a creepy alien? Well, first of all, Araki actually based Sethin's design off of the robot in the intro to Tetsujin 28 Go, a 1960s series about a young man and a leftover robot from World War II. This series got huge in Japan and debuted on American television under the name Gigantor, but later took on the names Iron Fighter and Iron Man. Araki gets his inspiration from the original show's theme song, but man, Shin Tetsujin 28 from the 80s has this absolute banger, man. I should come back to this series in the future, seriously.
YouTube is a platform where there are videos. Neil is watching carefully everything you post. Censor that word and maybe that other thing, and is it okay to talk about this? Auto play, switch off! subscribe.
Once we get a glimpse of Tetsujin himself, we can see his shadow behaves in much the same way as Sethin's. In fact, both characters have large noses that protrude forward and are nearly invisible when eclipsed from the front or back. I think the big thing that just throws people off is the shape of Sethin's head, but surprisingly, many predatory birds seem to have wider heads than you might expect. To put it in meme terms, have you ever seen that frame of Phineas and Ferb where Phineas looks at the camera head on? What makes this worse is it's probably what most people see when having a conversation with the guy. Here's my best attempt to illustrate what Sethin's 3D form would look like. These are the canonical appearances, head on and from the side, and here's what it would look like from a 45-degree angle. I also went ahead and emphasized the beak to better demonstrate the dimension of it. You're welcome. And after all of that, episode 2, which covers the last 2.5 chapters, is somehow even weirder. And I personally believe it to be the most disturbing part of the entire series. I'm not kidding, this is probably the last first episode you want to show somebody, so you have been warned. So Alessi attacks Polnareff, cutting him and attempting to drown him in the bathtub, and in what may be the most genius maneuver, Polnareff distracts Alessi with a... Hey man, creativity points, am I right? Not just for Polnareff, but for Araki, who decided to include this sound effect when the poop sticks to Alessi's arm. He's so grossed out that he says a main character would never do a thing like that, and while some may say this is a fourth wall break, think back to the last time you called somebody a main character. My point is, I think JoJo's world is the realest there is, considering there are references to real-life art, comics, media, and there are multiple confirmed universes that the characters can travel between, but that's a whole video in itself. And this right here is the big reveal. Where did the nice lady go? Polnareff kept asking himself. The first time, I thought Alessi was the lady, like, just in a disguise, but Lord have mercy, Sethin has de-aged this poor woman into a fetus. And why is it making little noises, bro? This is a horrifying scene, and Polnareff's situation only gets worse when Sethin touches him again, reverting his age to 3, and beginning a pursuit through the building. First of all, I have to give Araki insane props for his willingness to push these concepts to their maximum potential. This is something the series always does a great job at, especially as you move from part 3 to 4 and so on. Maybe it just caters to the yellow shirt kid in me, but whenever we get some drawn out explanation or superpower in a show or movie, I always want to see it used in unexpected ways. I think a big theme of Alessi is his desire and his ability to victimize his opponents, and this is largely what makes him such a terrifying villain to face. He puts you in the most vulnerable state possible, that of a literal naked child with nowhere to run or hide. This is the kind of thing that resonates with you on a whole new level, and I'm sure there are many people out there that had a hard time watching this episode. But if you made it this far, congratulations, because you're rewarded with one of the craziest endings of an episode ever. Polnareff gets trapped in a room he can't escape from and has to play a little wee party hide-and-seek. That is, picking a spot in the room and hoping it isn't the first thing Alessi checks when he inevitably breaks through the door. Now the way Polnareff gets out of this one is so complicated, I still couldn't remember it on the watch I did for this video. He can hide in a bucket, or in the teddy bear, or the clock, or he could have escaped entirely, but no. After Alessi completely destroys the room, Polnareff stabs him and reveals the trick in this cool little animated cutaway. The manga has one panel to explain this, but the anime takes that Oingo Boingo style and fleshes it out a little bit here. This stupid mirror trick, man, how do you even come up with that?
Creeper.
By now, it's clear Alessi isn't winning, which makes this suspenseful music and dire fetus noise a little goofy, but there's still an entire chapter to go. That's right, we get a bonus fight between Jotaro and Alessi, where despite being 10 years younger, Jotaro still opens a can of whoop-ass on this guy. They really don't give him any slack either. Both Jotaro and Polnareff use their adult abilities to just pulverize this guy, as is deserved. But again, there's still a good chunk of this chapter which is dedicated to one of the saddest side plots in the whole show. The canonically named Nice Lady has reverted back to her former self and begins searching desperately for the young boy who saved her. She eventually finds Polnareff, but instead of telling her the truth, he turns and walks away. This is one of the most puzzling decisions Polnareff ever makes, and the excuse of, I can't have a girlfriend because I'm traveling and I might die, just doesn't satisfy me enough. Polnareff's mission is to find the man with 2 right hands as a means of avenging the soul and innocence of his sister. This situation is oddly similar to the fight with Alessi, or in more accurate terms, Polnareff's struggle to escape him. In the visual details of both stories, large hands are used to emphasize how these poor children are being tormented. It may be possible that seeing this from the victim's point of view helped Polnareff better understand his purpose of serving the world. I mean, he's an older brother, and behind this veil of vengeance for his sister's death is an instinct to protect her. And we continually see his willingness to sacrifice for others, which makes the nice lady's line about her little knight just hit a bit harder if you know what's coming. Even without seeing his stand, she can still see the true spirit of Polnareff, cementing him as one of the greatest JoBros of all time, sworn to a life of guarding the safety of the world. And it doesn't stop here. If you've seen my previous JoJo videos, you'll remember there's a lot more of a relationship between Polnareff and Iggy in the anime, which better sets up some later episodes involving the two. Well, these episodes are no exception. The entire encounter is offset from the manga by about half a chapter as a means of incorporating more scenes. To better show how the Bastard and Sethan fights were happening at the same time, the anime adds this scene where Iggy watches Avdol and Joseph while eating a sandwich. Classic. I think a lot of JoJo episodes can be broken down into a formula, but it's these little side stories that not only flesh out the main cast of characters, but give each pair of episodes an identity apart from the series. And I know I said this is probably the worst place to start watching JoJo, but I have to confess, these were actually the first episodes I showed my friends after I got into the series. And surprisingly or not, they dug it. Maybe it's the animation, maybe it's the wholesome thematic elements, or maybe it's the grisly details and crazy stunts that these characters continue to pull off. But man, Alessi is just another fantastic example of a villain that pushes the limits of characterization to serve you the best possible story. Which only reinforces my belief that shock or violence or any of these mature elements can be used to explore way deeper and darker themes, because if you think about it, fetuses and pedophiles are far from the worst thing you could find on Twitter. And to round out the episode, the Crusaders meet up after their respective fights. Oh, and we have an original manga panel of Iggy doing his iconic ending bark, something the anime sticks in every episode. So is this the most disturbing episode? The most bizarre episode of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure? Comment below and leave any critiques you think might help improve my content. I post regularly on Instagram and on my other two channels, so go check those out for some games and behind the scenes content. And that's all I got for you guys, so I'll see you in the next video.
Next time on LukeWilsonTV.